Once dubbed Fallout New Vegas in space, The Outer Worlds took the RPG world by storm back in 2019, selling millions of copies and even getting nominated for Game of the Year. It lost to Sekiro, by the way, but since its initial success, The Outer Worlds has largely been forgotten, lacking the long-term staying power of titles like Skyrim, The Witcher 3, Fallout 4, and New Vegas. So what happened to The Outer Worlds? Was it just overhyped in a lackluster year for RPGs, or is it a hidden gem just waiting to get rediscovered? And can I ever forgive Obsidian for not allowing us to romance Parvati? Nah, I'm still mad about that, let's be real. In this video, we're going to revisit The Outer Worlds 5 years after its release, and discover whether it's still worth playing today. This video is more of a retrospective than a review, so I will be discussing lots of spoilers. If you're just here to figure out whether The Outer Worlds is worth playing, but you don't want any spoilers, then I won't keep you in suspense any longer. I definitely recommend The Outer Worlds to any RPG fan. I don't think it's necessarily worth dropping $50 or $60 on it, especially if cash is tight for you. However, if it's on sale, then I would definitely pick it up. The Outer Worlds is a good solid RPG with lots of player choices, varied dialogue and role-playing options, good writing, interesting companions, and fun but simple combat. One playthrough will take you anywhere from 20 to 30 hours to complete, with an extra 10 to 15 more hours to complete both DLCs. But you can easily do multiple playthroughs if you want to make different story choices, and at this point I've spent over 100 hours playing The Outer Worlds across multiple playthroughs. But anyhow, this intro has gone on long enough, so let's buckle up, grab some iced coffee, and dive into the character creator. One of the biggest strengths of The Outer Worlds and past Obsidian games like Fallout New Vegas is that the developers put a big emphasis on player choice and created avenues for true role-playing. Many RPGs, especially today, treat dialogue options and player choice as illusory window dressing. Sure, you're making choices by clicking on dialogue options and completing quests, but the end result always seems to funnel you to the same place. However, Obsidian really gives you a lot of leeway to step into the role of your character and shape them into whoever you want them to be. So for this playthrough, I concocted a backstory for my character, a corporate wetwork specialist who focused on espionage, sabotage, and assassination. Facing potential criminal prosecution back on Earth after being framed for murder by a rival corporation, my character bought passage onto the Hope spaceship in order to escape the terrestrial kangaroo corpo courts and chart a new life in the Outer Worlds. My guy is ruthless and seeks to take the straightest path to objectives, even if it means killing. But he's not outright evil. This ain't a bald, worst playthrough kind of protagonist. I'm saving that for later when we get closer to The Outer Worlds 2. If talking his way past a problem leads to the fastest result, he'll take that option. But otherwise, he'll let his gun do the talking. This backstory allowed me to approach The Outer Worlds in a completely new way, making decisions I've never made in the game before, such as killing the tarmac guards on Edgewater to avoid paying a landing fee, or assassinating faction leaders in order to clear out an obstacle and save some time. As for aesthetics, the character creator in The Outer Worlds is just fine. Appearance customization options are fairly lackluster, but since the entire game is in a first-person perspective and there are no functional mirrors, you'll never actually see your character outside of the menu screen. It is what it is. The stat allocation of your character build is very Fallout coded, which is unsurprising considering two of the original Fallout devs, Tim Kaine and Leonard Boyarsky, created The Outer Worlds. Hell, the game even has a budget version of VATS called Tactical Time Dilation, which allows you to slow down time and target individual enemy body parts, inflicting status debuffs. Attributes are basically your special stats, broken down into strength, dexterity, intelligence, perception, charm, and temperament. One nice little detail I liked about the character creator is that Phineas will make offhand comments based on how you adjust your stats, similar to Doc Mitchell in Fallout New Vegas.
Oh, your test scores were better than mine. Almost. You're a few stars short of a constellation.
Skills are very similar to Fallout as well, dictating things like weapon proficiency, hacking, sneak, persuasion, etc. But one unique thing about Outer Worlds builds is how the skills leveled up in groupings of 3. So rather than leveling up persuasion, lying, and intimidation separately, you initially level up the entire persuasion grouping of skills until you hit level 50. Then you have to invest points into the individual stat to specialize further. The reason they did this is because of a problem that some players ran into in the OG Fallout games. For instance, you might invest a lot of points into energy weapons at the start of the game, only to discover that energy weapons are harder to come by until later in the game, effectively handicapping your build for a good portion of your playthrough. Grouping up the skills in this way allows you more build flexibility in the early game, so you can also experiment, discover what you like, and then specialize further as you progress into the mid and late game. But much like covering up a bald spot with a toupee, this system is far from perfect, and skills are a double-edged sword in the Outer Worlds. Skill checks are often far too easy to pass, even if you haven't invested jack shit into the skill. Because in addition to your actual build investment, you can also supplement skills with buffs from your armor, consumable items, and companions. Leadership is by far the most broken skill in the Outer Worlds, because at rank 60, you gain a passive that doubles the buff you get from companions. So it's not particularly difficult to pass pretty much any skill check in the base game by simply swapping around companions, gear, and using consumables to overcome any shortcomings in your build. This makes builds feel particularly meaningless, at least from a skill building perspective, as there are very few trade-offs or missed opportunities from how you decide to invest your skill points. This problem is somewhat rectified in the Peril on Gorgon DLC, which has much harder skill checks, but in the base game, you can pretty much pass everything regardless of your build, which is like a major bummer, man. For this playthrough, I invested most of my skill points into dialogue and ranged weapons, adding in a bit of leadership and technical skills later on. So basically, I crafted a gun-toting Riz Giga-Chad consistent with my character's backstory. Another interesting mechanic are the so-called flaws, which pop up at certain points in your playthrough. Flaws apply permanent debuffs to your character based on things you encounter. For instance, you may develop a fear of robots after taking a bunch of damage from them. Or you might develop a drug addiction and become reliant on consumables after puffing on too many Fent inhalers. I find this feature very intriguing, but unfortunately, flaws are optional. You can choose to reject flaws, so they are mainly there for role-playing purposes, or if you want to make the game a bit more challenging. I kind of wish Obsidian would have fully committed to flaws because it's a very interesting concept. Character regression, if you will. But the ability to just completely ignore it basically renders it meaningless, unless you're playing on the highest difficulty, in which case flaws are mandatory. And speaking of difficulty, the Outer Worlds also has a special hardcore mode called Supernova, which introduces survival mechanics, tougher enemies, and companion permadeath. Fast travel is also limited, and you can only make a manual save by sleeping on your ship. However, you can only turn this setting on at the very start of your playthrough. So I guess I'm missing out for now, but this is definitely something I'm itching to try out. Now that our character is created and pulled out of the deep freeze, we're dropped into the first major location of the game, Edgewater. My approach to this retrospective is going to be a bit different than my typical reviews. Rather than breaking down all the various mechanics in separate sections, I'm going to run through my playthrough and talk about the gameplay aspects as we go along. So keep that in mind if you care about spoilers. One big part of the marketing for the Outer Worlds is that you're free to choose your own path, even to the point of becoming a psychopathic murder hobo. Unlike Bethesda games, there are no immortal NPCs in the Outer Worlds, and any character can be slaughtered by the protagonist, including quest givers and potential companions. This certainly adds an interesting flavor to the game and makes the world feel more immersive, because nothing is more immersion breaking than unloading an entire clip into an NPC only to watch them slouch over and be completely fine, which is what happens to pretty much every single character in Starfield. I don't necessarily recommend becoming a murder hobo, because this will just make you fail a bunch of quest content, but it was always interesting knowing that I had lethal force as an option in my back pocket, just in case one of these NPCs gave me any lip or looked at me wrong. As for the setting, the Outer Worlds is a corpo-dominated dystopia. Corporations have colonized planets in a new solar system, and they have complete control over the lives of the people. While much of the subject matter of this game is very dark, it's kind of undercut by the goofy, dry humor that's peppered into every conversation.
Sprats are an excellent source for my daily recommended intake of mercury. Chester D. Higgins. The D stands for definitely not insane. I use it as a reminder.
Personally, I like the tone of the game, but it definitely makes it harder to take things seriously whenever the game gets darker in the main story. And there's always another Quirk Chungus joke just around the corner. The vibe is much closer to Fallout 4 Sarcastic Jerk than Mass Effect. It is what it is. Some of the best content in this game is right at the beginning, which is good because so many games seem to get this wrong. It gets better after 12 hours, they said about Starfield, so why did they make the beginning of the game suck then? Anyhow, I'm getting sidetracked again, but I can never resist an opportunity to dunk on Starfield. Anyhow, our main goal in Edgewater is to obtain a power regulator so we can get our ship up and running again. In order to do this, we need to resolve a conflict between two factions, the town leadership of Edgewater and a group of deserters who set up camp outside the main town. We have a lot of options for how to deal with this situation. We can side with Edgewater by convincing the deserters to come back to town. We can side with the deserters by stealing the power regulator from the Edgewater Saltuna factory, thus dooming the town. We can convince Reed to leave town and turn over power to Adelaide. Or we can just slaughter whoever stands in our way and steal the power regulator from either location. The only problem I have with player choice in the Outer Worlds is that the big faction struggles we are tasked with solving always seem to play out along the same lines. We typically will either side with Faction A, side with Faction B, or broker peace between the two factions, which usually involves icing out one obstinate NPC, for instance, Adelaide or Graham on Monarch. It's also not particularly difficult to negotiate peace in these quests, which is the path most players will probably take in all of these conflicts. I don't know, it just removes some of the tension and stakes for me when there is one obviously good option that everyone will most likely lean towards. I would have liked to see a few more morally difficult choices, similar to the Baron's questline in The Witcher 3. Something where there is no option that is clearly better than all of your other available choices. For this playthrough, I decided to slaughter the deserters and steal the power regulator from their camp. This saved me some time trying to negotiate peace with some bums. Have you tried getting a job, bro? Combat in the Outer Worlds is very similar to the open-world Fallout games. It's pretty fun, but nothing super special. However, gunfights can actually be quite tense. It's not super difficult, but you can easily die if you're being careless, and enemies pack a strong punch even on normal difficulty. I enjoyed this because too many games today make it so it's basically impossible to die on normal. Companions in the Outer Worlds are a mixed bag. Parvati and Vicar Max are standouts, and then there's a steep drop-off with the rest of the crew. Felix is a revolutionary redditor/incel. Ellie is the rebellious, spoiled rich girly. Nyoka is a drunk mercenary drowning her pain with a bottle, and Sam is goofy comic relief. Every companion has their own questline, but there is no romance. Well, there's kind of romance if you count Parvati's quest, but it's basically a wingman/cuck simulator as you foster a love affair between two ladies with a touch of the tism. The good news is, if there are any companions you don't like, you always have the option to kick them out of your party or never recruit them to begin with. My footage from Groundbreaker and Roseway got corrupted, but I told Felix to go kick rocks, and I screwed over all the Anti-Cleo's scientists by selling all their corpo secrets to Gladys. Our next destination is the planet of Monarch, where we have to locate an information broker who has a MacGuffin that Phineas Wells needs to execute his plan to save the colony. The planet is a largely abandoned and untamed hellscape with far more dangerous monsters and a brewing conflict between two rival factions. Only one major corporation is still officially in business on Monarch, as the board has abandoned the planet and effectively cut them off from the rest of the colony, at least from the standpoint of legality and paperwork. One more thing that intrigues me about the Outer Worlds is the possibility of a pacifist playthrough. It's entirely possible to complete the entire game without killing a single NPC or monster, and many quests will even have an option to resolve things without violence. When we infiltrate Hytham's radio station, which has been overrun by marauders, one way to deal with the violent gang is to hack a terminal and set off the fire alarm, which will cause everyone to run out of the facility without the player firing a single shot. We can even non-violently neutralize the final bosses of the game with high investment in technical and speech skills if we so choose. But this ain't a pacifist playthrough this time around, and when it came time to deal with the dreaded 3-choice formula in Monarch's main quest, I decided to slaughter Sanjar and Graham instead to save myself some time. This took me a few attempts and a lot of consumable items, as I was severely underleveled and undergeared for the content on Monarch, but eventually I got it done and got ready to head to Byzantium, home of the villainous Board. Byzantium is the gilded capital of the Outer Worlds, where the wealthiest and most powerful people in the colony reside. And it's here where we start to see how bad things really are in the Halcyon colony. All over town, buildings are boarded up, and there are lots of whisperings about food shortages and that sort of thing. At this point in this story, we discover that the Board is planning to cryogenically freeze a good portion of the colony in an effort to solve the food crisis. Rather than trying to find a long-term solution to the issue, the Board is opting to live out their lives in luxury and kick the can down the road. At this point, my guy has been working with Phineas exclusively, and I didn't feel like ratting him out was the right move after what we discovered about the Board. However, I do have to say that one of my favorite NPCs in this game shows up during a quest for the Board, which I wasn't able to re-experience during this playthrough. He's a dim-witted, by-the-book assassin named Sherman Bradshaw, and just listen to this conversation.
Thanks for the tip-off, friend. Can we get to the killing? My palms are starting to itch.
What? Killing? What the fuck is going on here?
My friend and I here have jobs to do. You just sit tight for a minute while we discuss how we're gonna handle this.
Hear me out. What if...
Will you pipe down? We're trying to have a business meeting here. You must be new to the assassination game. If you talk to your victims, it makes it harder to kill them, see? It's not recommended. Didn't you read the handbook? Oh, all right. The anticipation is killing me, though. Get it? Because I want to kill her? Well, can't say I've ever left someone alive before. Hope I can sleep tonight.
Byzantium is also Ellie's hometown, and her companion quest sees us dropping in on her parents. I've never really liked Ellie that much as a character, and maybe I was in a funk after Dragon Age the Veilguard, so I decided to take a pretty wild route with her quest after her parents told us to leave.
What in the void did you do? I didn't like how things went down either, but did you have to go and kill them? That wasn't a problem before it meant killing my folks in their own home. You're on your own now. Consider my debt to you forgotten and canceled. It sure better be. Now go!
I think it's absolutely wild that the game allows you to do stuff like this, and I like that there are actually points of no return with your companions. I couldn't corral her with a speech check or anything like that, which makes sense. If you assassinate someone's parents, it's not like they're still going to be down to travel with you. But anyhow, back to the main story, we face a big moral quandary while stealing chemicals for Phineas Wells. If we take all of the chemicals, then the test subjects trapped in the Board facility will all die. But if we leave the test subjects alive, then we won't have enough chemicals to revive all of the Hope passengers. Taking all of the chemicals leads to the best ending in the end slides, but it's an interesting question. Would you be willing to sacrifice a few probably doomed individuals for the sake of potentially saving everyone on the Hope and the whole colony at large? At the end of the game, you'll have to decide whether to side with Phineas or the Board. Either way, you'll fight through the Tartarus prison planet and confront either Phineas or Sophia depending on your choice. As I mentioned earlier, you can bypass the final fights of the game with skill checks, so it is possible to finish the base game entirely as a pacifist, which I think is really awesome. There is also a secret bad ending to the game if you're playing as a low intelligence character. Basically, you end up flying the Hope spaceship into the sun, which is pretty funny and nets you an achievement as well. But with the base game done and dusted, let's talk about the DLC. The Outer Worlds also had 2 major story expansions, each with roughly 5 hours of additional content and a new planet to explore. Peril on Gorgon was the first major expansion, where your crew travels to an abandoned Spacer's Choice facility to investigate a doomed research project. Peril on Gorgon fills some gaps in the Marauder lore, which was basically non-existent in the base game. Marauders were explained to us as these hyper-violent criminals who couldn't speak in coherent sentences and attacked you on sight. Yet, they somehow don't attack each other and can form gangs despite being violent, bumbling idiots. It was completely retarded, and clearly Obsidian phoned it in when writing this. Well, in the DLC, we learned the reason why people become marauders is because they were consuming uppers to improve their work performance. One of the side effects of this drug was a sharp mental decline and violent outbursts. Peril on Gorgon introduced much harder skill checks than the base game, so you will actually need investment in things like lockpicking, hacking, and speech to overcome the more difficult checks. I wish the rest of the game was like this, so our builds were more meaningful. One memorable moment for me was being able to use Parvati to unlock a special dialogue check because I had completed her companion quest in the base game. This was a nice touch.
We ain't subversives. We're gainfully employed. This is a private contract. Miss Junlei can't get too mad if we rough up some trespassers. Especially if I was nice enough to warn him first. Huh?
Hi, I'm the girlfriend.
Oh, shit. Fine. You want to check out the lab? Go for it. We won't stop you.
In the end, Peril on Gorgon runs into the same formulaic faction struggle as you either side with Olivia, side with Minnie, or make peace between the two. Overall, an interesting DLC, but far from a can't-miss experience. Murder on Eridanos is the second expansion and my favorite one overall. We travel to a resort planet to investigate the murder of a serial star named Halcyon Helen. There are a lot of 1950s sci-fi and murder mystery aesthetics baked into this DLC, which I absolutely love. Overall, I thoroughly enjoyed this expansion because I love murder mysteries and investigations. But I wasn't entirely crazy about the ending, and this is probably a one-and-done DLC for me now that I know the twist. So, spoiler alert if you care at this point, basically the entire murder investigation is a complete farce because the person that hired you was the killer, and he was trying to throw the scent off his tail. And the victim actually had a twin, so the real Halcyon Helen actually survived. In the end, you defeat the evil murderer mastermind and save the resort planet from complete destruction by parasites. Murder on Eridanos was a fun little distraction that I finished in about 6 hours, including side quests. For both DLC, I only really recommend them if you really love the base game. So at the end of the day, The Outer Worlds is absolutely still worth playing. It's a solid RPG with lots of player agency, meaningful choices, fun gameplay, and good replay value. I'm excited to see what Obsidian cooks up with The Outer Worlds 2, and I think this is a very promising franchise. It probably will never reach the heights of Fallout or Mass Effect, but if Obsidian can continue expanding the lore and giving us good stories in this universe, then I'm all for it. We need more sci-fi RPGs, and Starfield just ain't cutting it. So there you have it. We've taken a look back at The Outer Worlds over 5 years after release. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to Big Dan Gaming for more RPG videos and reviews. Big shout out to all the channel members for supporting my content. Until next time, this has been Big Dan. I should go.